Here's an idea. Upvotes might be democratic, but that doesn't mean that they work. You probably already know, but I'm going to explain anyway because it's my job. Reddit, YikYak, Hacker News, and a few other websites are built on voting systems, meaning people post things, links, photos, text, comments, and other people vote on those things. Up if they like it, down if they don't. Lots of upvotes means something is good and therefore made more visible. Bad posts with low or negative tallies sink or disappear completely so they don't pollute your precious eyeballs.
My eyes, the goggles do nothing.
In a phrase, the people decide. YikYak's founders recently told the New York Times that their goal was to create a more democratic social network to, quote, level the playing field and connect everyone. Even if it's not always made that explicit, there's a common idea that sites like Reddit, YikYak et al. Are democratic. I mean, there's voting, just like when we do our civic duty, which happens in democracy. There are no curators, kings, editors, or oligarchs. There are no titles passed between people or lauding of posts not conferred by the community. Such is the basic idea of both Reddit and governmental democracy. Ideally, outside of a few mediators, there is no undeposable ruling class. The people are in control, and everyone is capable of making it. In internet terms, that means users and content, two of my least favorite words, are all equal. Each user is capable of posting and having their post succeed. Each user's votes count equally. In government, this means citizens have equal rights. Each citizen is equal before the law, is equally capable of political action, and each citizen's vote counts equally. But, unfortunately, not everyone is equal before the law or in government. Citizens and even the democratically elected have a bias that they act on, often unintentionally, that undoes the potential for true, perfect equality. So we get things like structural oppression or disenfranchisement and keepers at basically all of the gates because of regulation or oversight. Or paradoxically, freedom. And there are democratic dynasties, they're just harder to spot because they're often the consequence of inherited or exchanged wealth and influence that is often considered the point of a system that allows anyone to make it. People who can trade influence, they made it. That's what making it is. So the playing field may start level, but it gets bumpy. Anything can succeed, but attitudes, expectations, and norms develop, which make it much more likely that certain things succeed. If you need proof of this in America, just think about the lobbying process, the cash required to run in a major election, the race and gender of most government officials, etc., etc., etc. The field is bumpy. Things go similarly on the internet as well. Like, any post can become impossibly popular and make it to the front page of Reddit, but its chances are much better if it is an image, not text, and it starts on RA, GIF, funny, pics, WTF, etc., etc., etc. Through their hard work, Redditors like Watercolor and A Wild Sketch Appeared have amassed considerable audiences and influence, but influence can also be ported to Reddit from YouTube, television, publishing, and so on. Since after an amount of time, net votes are displayed basically accurately next to every post, you can get a sense of how your peers are reacting, and it's been shown that seeing upvotes before the content being upvoted can result in a 25 to 32% increase in the likelihood of additional upvotes. In other words, the upvoted get upvotedier. But okay, where, you might ask, do those first few popularity-spawning upvotes come from? And surely it's not just early popularity that begets later popularity, and you'd be right. Now we are getting to the meat of democracy's matter, which I'm pretty sure is hot dogs. So, many of us have seen something like this situation. A friend posts an update on Facebook that says something like, "I just got mugged, but I'm okay. They got my phone, but I'm not hurt, just a little shaken up." A mutual friend then clicks the like button and clarifies in a comment, sympathy like, "Glad to hear you're okay." It's weird, but it makes perfect sense. So much of internet communication is fast-paced, short and sweet, following our gut. And much of that communication is carried by technology not built to convey nuance. There are a lot of shortcuts, partial meanings, and streams working in concert. Reddit's voting system, the most powerful action one can take in determining the popularity of a post, is no different. It requires that one boil down their reaction to positive, negative, or none. You could leave a nuanced comment, but comments are secondary to the post and its score, both in design and effect. Candidates for popular Reddit posts, then, are the ones inspiring easy reactions that create the most clear and distinct feel, ideally positive. Upvotes to the left. A very successful Reddit post is mostly, not always, but mostly, one that is easy to understand and aligns with the expectations of its intended audience. That should sound familiar. The unfortunate truth seems to be that a system built to accommodate anything can provide a tyranny of choice, and so we develop easy ways to make decisions. I'm not saying that democratic systems need to be more restrictive, but for no shortage of reasons, some within the systems themselves, some having to do with the way people interact with them, they do tend to round off edges, especially the edges likely to present challenges to the system itself or the people within it. Or as David Banks puts it in writing for The New Inquiry, the site promotes mundanity and repetition over experimentation and diversity by providing the user with a too accurate picture of what appeals to the entrenched user base. In other words, because they know what appeals to the user base, users will consider only things that will most likely appeal to the user base as candidates for posting, because karma. It's easy to see this as mostly harmless, but when provocative content becomes the most likely to be rewarded with karma in certain communities, it becomes the most likely candidate for posting in the minds of users, which then leads to more provocative content. Reddit has had no shortage of struggles with this very problem. YikYak is dealing with it right now. Philosopher Jacques Rancière talks about a great misunderstanding of modern democracy, the collapsing of the space between politically active citizen and consumer of goods. That we think about these democratic systems not as ways to responsibly divide power so that we may prosper or benefit, but as systems which help us pursue, quote, intimate pleasures. We think, oh, the market will decide. But then we drive the market based on our own whims. So while Reddit and YikYak might be perfectly democratic, that doesn't mean they're egalitarian or not hedonistic.
I apologize for nothing.
What do you guys think? Are all upvotes created equal? Do these democratic systems encourage bad behavior? Let us know in the comments. And Idea Channel is not a democracy, but rather a rhizomocracy. Please subscribe and become a part of the network. Roll for comment. Let's see what you guys had to say about D&D and comics. darthboolean writes a really great comment on the subreddit about the importance of permanent death in both tabletop role-playing games and comics, and talks about how it's something you can actually do in a tabletop role-playing game, and that when you kill a character, it gives their actions and their achievements meaning and importance. And I totally agree with this. I just want to say that it's not my position, even a little bit, that player characters should be immortal. That, you know, I think killing player characters is, like Darth says, an important part of playing tabletop role-playing games. The question, I think, is that what's the tension between allowing them to exist long enough to embody a great story so that when you kill them, it has meaning? And so Darth sort of takes this idea and applies it to comics and says that, you know, when there is an issue of a comic coming up where it claims that Batman's gonna die or Wolverine's gonna die, there's a part of us that knows they're not. They're gonna come back later and it will return to the status quo, and that's not exciting, and it causes us to be cynical, and that maybe comics have given over too much to one side of that tension of allowing something to embody a great story, but then not giving it meaning by allowing the story to end. And I think that this comment is so good and great, and I wish that I had read this comment before writing the episode. So good. ArdentDrops puts some of those ideas another way by talking about the trivialization of characters. We're saying that if you're not threatening them with actual real consequences, you are not respecting their power in the world, and then asks whether or not by not permanently killing certain comic book characters, are we trivializing their struggles, which is, yeah, I think that that's a really great way to put that. Makutakanuva puts this into more certain terms by talking about the distinction between narrative that's meant to comfort versus narrative that is meant to immerse at the cost of comfort, and provides the Red Wedding as an example of something where the comfort of the audience was not really maybe considered. And yeah, this makes me wonder sort of like, how long does a character have to be around before something like the Red Wedding has the maximum amount of meaning? That, I think, is maybe the big question for me related to all of these elements. Kayla Haffley writes a really insightful comment about how this idea might hold water, but not really until you approach this like complicated taxonomy of player styles, GM styles, writer styles, and that the way that these things relate to one another is not a simple one-to-one related to like their sort of creative station as it exists in the two different mediums, but also the way that they orient themselves towards those characters. And yeah, I totally agree, and this makes me want to like sit down and sort of draw this out. This is a great comment. Links to this one and all the others in the doobly-doo. Merav Ulyansky brings up a really important point that there are clear economic and commercial factors that determine the way multi-author, long-standing characters are treated in comic books, and that this conversation sort of treated comics as a monolith, and that we didn't talk about how this relates to indie comics or short-run comics, stuff like that. And yeah, I agree. I think that, you know, we were coming at this, the premise is that we're talking about these massive, larger-than-life comics characters, but there was room for nuance there, absolutely. And finally, I should have known that this video would be used to justify whiny comic bro tears, and I'm really disappointed in myself that I didn't catch that in the writing process. We have a video about Thor in the works, so I don't want to say too much because I'm going to talk about it for 7 straight minutes in a couple weeks, but I will say that I don't think that the new Thor, also Thorina, come on man, is in any way a violation of the free will or the authority or the value of Thor as a character. Not the least of the reasons being that the old Thor still exists and is in the book and is reacting the way that I would expect him to react to the situation. Like I said, I got a lot to say. I disagree with you, sir. This week's episode was brought to you by the hard work of these player characters. We have a Facebook and IRC and a subreddit. You can still mail us records. Links to all of those things in the doobly-doo. And the tweet of the week comes from Ivory Oasis, who points us towards an article about how feminist Thor is selling way more comic books than dude Thor. How's that for comeuppance? And hey, in case you were wondering, this episode of Idea Channel was brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is an easy way to create a website, blog, or online store for you and your ideas. Squarespace features a user-friendly interface, custom templates, and 24/7 customer support. To try Squarespace, go to squarespace.com/idea channel for a special offer. Squarespace, build it beautiful.